Welcome to Podcasts and Players, everybody. Oh man, you've been waiting. I've gotten hundreds of letters from people all over the world. I've had to go through legal battles. I killed a man in self-defense, but now I think I'm finally ready to introduce one of the coolest guests that I think I'm ever going to have on this show. We've got a man who needs no introduction, but just in case you don't know, he's been doing D&D stories for many, many years. He has, I think he's up to like in his late 50s of numbers of Tales from my podcasts, or sorry, Tales from my D&D campaign, and he's also got his own podcast where he does lore streams and art streams. Please, everybody, give it up for Demonac.
Greetings.
Is it Demonac or Demonac?
It's Demonac.
Okay, like Almanac, right?
Something like that. Yeah. There's no good origin for the name. I just wanted something that sounded like a blatantly evil overlord. That's what I went with.
Looks at notes, crosses off first question. Okay, yeah, that's out of the way. You know, you'll be surprised though, because like most people don't have like a really, quote unquote, smart name. Or
the most people's name is something they chose when they're 12 and they were using it for however many years.
Yup.
So,
yep. I mean, it's my like original email address from 6th grade. I'm not gonna share it because I still use it, but
yeah,
it's the same sort of thing. And people are like, that's your email address. I'm like, don't judge me. Don't judge me. Sparky Kitten XXX. You know, whatever, like yours was in 6th grade.
Yeah. I don't think I had an email address in 6th grade because in 6th grade it was 1990-ish. because as we've all figured out by now, I'm the old one.
You're the old guy. No, it's fine. I just turned 30 and I felt like the old guy. Maybe bringing you on is my way of trying to feel better.
Just like hedging there, you know, just adjusting the bell curve.
No, but I'm glad to have you on. We've got a lot of ground to cover because I want to know about like the origin or story of Demonac. Not just the name, but like what got all this started. Like let's dive in. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know, like how did you get started in making D&D content?
Sometime the reason I had 1990 on the mind there is because I was trying to figure out what the hell year was it when I was in around grade 6, because sometime around grade 6 or 7, a bunch of my friends in school, so we're like, I don't know, like 11 or 12 or something, someone got the second edition like D&D books and we just started playing. And I don't remember a lot of details of stuff that we did back then. It's all kind of blurry because your brain hasn't fully formed. Like your brain hasn't fully formed until you're in your early 20s. But like when you're 12 or 13, a lot of those connections just get pruned off. Like your brain just throws them away because like that's not helping out. I don't need to remember what my literal first D&D character is. I don't know. But we were playing D&D back then and we were making terrible rules decisions and misunderstanding things. All I remember is that we enjoyed it and we enjoyed it enough that it stuck with me and I wanted to make worlds and do stuff. I remember the first game that I GM'd. I was like, okay, I have this campaign idea. It was this incredibly terrible, like whatever 13-year-old or something like campaign idea. It was like I drew up a map and there was like some castles and stuff like that and some things to do. And they met up with like a Terminator from the future. And yeah, this brilliant genius idea. I was so creative at the time that my Terminator from the future came with like a loser not Terminator guy from the future, just like in the movie. And it was so terribly described. They knew that he was like, the Terminator was very strong because he used a 2-handed weapon in each hand. He was walking around.
Very cool. Very cool.
13-year-old cool. Yeah. But it was so poorly executed that we were halfway through before they figured out that I meant Terminator like the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, not like a Warhammer 40,000 Terminator, which is a giant armor suit.
Okay.
So I started early on. I had lots of ambition, no talent, and just kind of like went from there. But, you know, I played tons of D&D just from there on, basically through high school, played a lot of Magic the Gathering and stuff too.
Hell yeah, Magic, woo!
Yeah, not all that stuff. Went to university, found different people to play D&D with, and just kept going there. And sometime after I got out of university, I didn't get a job in my field, so I was like just working crappy retail jobs and stuff like that, and I needed like a creative outlet. So that's when I started my D&D web comic. I had this idea, like I had read like Knights of the Dinner Table, which if you ever seen it, that's a very old like comic
Yeah,
books.
I've heard of it. I might have read a little bit of it. I don't
Yeah, they're
remember
comic books.
quite what it was.
It's about as ugly as another gaming comic, although it's obviously like drawn in pencil. It's a bunch of you'd recognize it if you've seen AGC, because it's a bunch of like cartoony people sitting around a table. I had this,
Right.
and I really liked something about what they were doing. It wasn't, I knew every time I was reading it, it was like, this is not how I would do it. But I really liked that idea that you had the people around the table, and that was a story, but there was also telling stories in the game that they were playing. And I really liked how you could do a back and forth there. So I came up with the idea to do my own, and part of the idea was, I'll go back and forth. They always showed all of the people sitting on the same side of the table, and that bothered me for some reason. Because you can see all the characters, but that means they're all sitting on the same side of the table. What the hell's going on? In the early another gaming comic ones, you'd have the back of the head sometimes. I'd alternate panels, so you'd see like this is like the front of two of these people and the side of the GM, and then they would like flip back and forth.
Yeah, I think you still do that for your Tales series too. Like you zoom out of the game.
I have the picture of the table that has. I just use the characters instead of like the players for the pictures, but a picture of the characters sitting around the table that I like to show sometime when we're saying clearly out of character stuff.
I like that though, because that there's never any confusion for who's talking. It's kind of nice.
Not anymore. I think there was a lot in some of the especially some of the middle episodes, but in the more recent episodes, I started showing. I just made these portraits, and I put the players like Twitter if they had one, or just their name, like little one players just goes by Paul because he doesn't have Twitter. But I liked having those up there. Now it's 100% clear if something is just out of character, and I put up the little like portrait, and you can see, oh, that's Angel saying that out of character.
Right.
It's never going to be perfect, because there are a lot of times that the things that people say around the table, it's not clear whether it's in character or out of character, and it's
you gotta make a judgment call.
It's kind of both. Like it's more like they're in character, breaking the fourth wall. Is like you got to decide for yourself. But
that's fair.
Fun stuff. Anyway, I made that web comic, which was 100% just I wanted to tell this story. And I thought if I made it a comic, somebody would ever actually look at it. Because if I just posted it as a blog, no one's ever going to read these things. If they do, they're never going to find them again. And I was doing that when I was crazy. When I started out, like I was like writing the scripts on the bus on the way to work and on the way home. And I'd get home, I'd get out my paint and like I'd copy and paste in paint.exe these ugly characters and stuff like that, and fill in the text. And when I started out, I was doing it like every day. And now there was a lot less text in those early ones, but it was still totally unsustainable. So it went on through, and I did that for years and years. It just got less and less frequent. It was every day. And then it was like, okay, it's going to be 3 days a week, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then, then it was like 2 a week, and then 1. And then by the end, the reason it kind of like crapped out at the end was I got really burnt out. And at that point, it had been like 2 months between strips. So eventually that crapped out and I couldn't do that anymore. But when I got back in a D&D game in town here, then I still had to make something. So I started thinking, oh man, I could do this thing on YouTube, right? I could just put up like clip art to like show vaguely what's going on the screen. It's the exact same thought process. I could just tell a story somehow, but if I put pictures there, somebody will actually watch it. And that's just the whole plan. And it just kind of goes from there, because once you start doing it, I never found it. Like the purpose was to just find the easiest way to do it. The purpose was to find the way that I could write the stuff and perform the script or whatever, and then illustrate it in the simplest, least time-consuming way possible. But I can't actually do that, because the more I'm able to do, then I know, well, I'm able to do that. That means I can if I can do that, then I could probably do this, which is a little bit more. And that's just how my brain works. So I'm just always pushing to make it more and bigger and stuff.
Yeah,
in ways
I
that
feel
are
that. I feel that.
you can really tell it's not necessarily helpful. There's a decent chunk of the audience that would prefer that I could keep it stripped down more and just get it out faster. Well, everyone wants it faster because it's incredibly slow. But I can't help but always be trying to make it a little bit more. Like I can just because there's always
Yeah.
the vision in my mind of what's going on is very cinematic. I'm like the like camera angles and stuff like that. And I'm thinking,
Yes.
what would this look like? And with this crazy action scene. And there's a reason that I have this tendency to focus way too much on and fights against one powerful enemy, even though that's really hard to do well and usually isn't done well in my games. D&D is not a great system for that usually.
Right.
Certainly not without a lot of work, but I'm always trying to do that because that's always the image I have in my mind. It's like they're going to go up against this super powerful guy or thing or whatever and have a crazy boss battle and stuff. And then half the time the boss just gets obliterated because of the action economy, but keep trying.
Yeah, there's a lot that you said that I totally agree with like that was sort of how I looked at it at first too, because I read today on Discord that you said that you use Adobe Animate, and that's what I started out with as well. I kind of screwed around with it as a teenager, but then like I kind of got back into it after I got back from being overseas, and I bought a tablet because that's the other thing. You use a mouse too, right?
Oh yeah.
Insane. You're insane. You need to get a tablet. Why?
You have to understand I don't have that kind of art background. Like, yes, I drew stuff all the time when in grade school, but I just really do not have a background of doing art. My background is more like computer science. So I think of things in a much more mechanistic way and not necessarily in that tactile sort of artistic way. So animate is what works for me. Like I'm not drawing anything in the traditional sense. I'm just my process is really just I like drop a rectangle or a circle on the screen. That's basically how you start out and animate. And then you can grab a corner or you can grab the middle of the line and create a new vertex and stretch it out. And you just keep stretching and twisting. You can take that line and you can curve it in or out and you bend things. And
You're like a sculptor more than a
yeah. And that's what I was gonna say. It's like it's just like sculpting, except sculpting in real life is very difficult and very tactile. Sculpting in like Adobe Animate is super easy in a sense because you have
without
200 undo levels.
Yeah.
So I just keep bashing this thing until it starts to look like what I want, and then try and put some like finish on it, and then move on.
Yeah, no worries. I guess for me the translation between so you're talking about when you were a kid you used to like draw stuff all the time and like that's all I did was doodle. I got in trouble because in school all I would do would just be doodling on the margins of my stuff. I'd doodle on tests and then they'd write in big red letters, "Don't draw on the tests." So I've always been someone who draws and like I cannot practice. I have like ADHD. Like you couldn't force me to practice drawing. Like it won't happen. But if I'm bored, that'll get me to draw because I'd rather draw than be listening to mathematics or whatever the hell I was learning. So
I have a pretty hard time practicing too. I mean, in practice, I'm just always working inefficiently. I'm always working, but it's inefficient because I'm always working. But I don't do a lot of drawing things for fun. There's all kinds of stuff that I want to draw and sketch out so that I'm a little bit closer if I want to move and do a future project. Because of course there are a million other things that I want to be doing.
Yeah.
But and I have to get ready for the current arc of TDDC is going to come to an end in some fixed number of episodes. And at that point, I took a hiatus on that game. And then with the same people, we went and we just created a new party and went to a different place in the world around the same time, just in case. There could be a little overlap in theory. But mostly they just went different places in the world because there's plenty of world left.
Right.
But I mean, that means at some point I've got to get my assets in order and draw like the new party and stuff like that. But I have a hard time doing that because I'm always too slow on the current episode and I need to keep working on that. So
it's an opportunity cost that's just it eats away at your soul, like I started this year. And by the way, all I was going to say earlier was that getting a tablet, like I got some cheap like $60 Chinese knockoff tablet that I've been using for 2 years, and the translation, it's basically just another mouse that you hold differently. That's all. For me, it just makes things a little easier, and the translation wasn't so bad. But I was going to mention that, like, I started this year by releasing my 3rd episode. I'm only on episode 3 of my shit.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, Adobe Animate, love you, but you crashed like 20 times during the production of this episode, probably more, and I lost maybe a good 3 days of work.
Are you doing the whole thing in like one like animate thing?
No, I split it up into chunks.
Yeah, okay. Because I've gotten back. I always used animate for the sprites, but for most of the run of TDDC, I actually did virtually no animation, like proper animation, even in animate. I was moving stuff around in Premiere, just tweening junk in Premiere, because again, the very low level of animation that was involved in like the first 30 episodes of TDDC, with a couple little exceptions.
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody's expecting Walt Disney from us, you know, like
no, and especially in the early episodes.
Yeah, as long as
now I've gotten more into, again, because over time, the level of things that I don't want to say the level of confidence, because I always have 100% confidence in what I know I can do. That's the I have like a weird mentality that way. Like, I have a very firm idea in my head of this is what I'm capable of. And then there's sort of, if I can do this, there's obviously not that much difference in going that little bit further, doing that 20% cooler thing that I want to do.
Incremental,
and like,
right.
When I get there, I can see how I could do that. So then I go ahead and I push the envelope that much. But so it's not really confidence thing, but still, it's like, in terms of just knowing what I can do, well, what I can do is increased a lot over the almost 10 years that I've been doing this. So now as I'm doing a lot of things that there are segments that are way more like animated in the traditional sense. Now I am doing a lot more like exporting those from animate in those just like little chunks, like 5 seconds, 3-second chunks, and slipping those into my giant Premiere timeline.
My big thing is I just hate Adobe. I hate how the products work. I mean, the feel of Animate's kind of nice, but I'm at a point where I'm over it. So after I did this last episode, I'm like, I need to learn something new. And then I saw Worthy Kids release a bunch of stuff and say, hey, this is all on Blender and it's all free. And then I saw Chris O'Neill, like a Newgrounds animator, release a tutorial for Blender. And I was like, I really want to learn this because it's free and it has 3D capabilities. And so I was like, all right, pause on the Peace Guild, pause on the series. I'm going to make another little animation, and I'm going to do it in full color, and it's going to be 3 minutes long, and it's going to be all in Blender, and I'm just going to fucking learn the program. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to focus on that. And I did that. I'm like, that's not enough. I need to learn a post-editing program that's not Blender, so I can add effects and all sorts of stuff. So then I did a tier list video that was 30 minutes long. I'll never do that again. I hated it. It was too much work, none of fun. And then now I've learned 2 things. The last thing I need to learn is Clip Studio Paint, which is like actually like a painting program. And I feel kind of like how you say, like, I'm not an artist. I can't use that. Like, I don't know how to like paint.
When a lot of that time, when the people who are like, because we know a lot of people in the community now who are great artists, they're like fantastic artists. Most of them, I think they spent a lot of the time drawing like characters constantly. And I was drawing junk that I could draw, which would be like robots and ugly looking like boxy cars, because that's the kind of stuff that I drew. But they were spending all that time on art, and I was spending all that time building Lego, basically. And then as soon as we got a computer, I was just like playing computer games the whole time, because I'm just
lost a lot of time to that too.
So I think a much more like mechanistic brain. Like, I want right angles and things
that's what makes your content really cool and unique. Like, I don't really see that sort of approach. That's like at least artistic. Like, a lot of the more, I guess, mechanical thinkers will say, don't even bother with art. Like, it'll just be man talking to camera. Like, this is how you can build a character with blah, 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 blah. Or let me tell you about the lore of blah, blah. You know, it's like, that's fine, you know, but those are, I mean, you see those everywhere. It's kind of like a dime a dozen. What you do is actually you make your own assets. Like, you use some clip art early on, but like, you are like making your own shit. You actually put a lot of work into it. I mean, that can't be diminished, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's starting to look pretty decent. Like I like how it looks. So I'm self-deprecating all the time about my art. That doesn't
You
mean that I
are.
don't like how it works. It doesn't mean I'm not proud of it. That's just like my response. Honestly, in large part that's my response to praise. I just have like the way I again, I'm very confident in what I know I can do. I don't necessarily praising me is hard because if your praise is below the level that I think I am, it's like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. I'm just like, yeah, okay, I know it's pretty good. You're saying that to me doesn't mean much. But if your praise is above the level that I think I'm at, then I'm like, well, now you're just being silly. And then I'm going
It's
to respond
hard.
with self-deprecation.
Yeah,
People are
I
like,
feel
"Oh
that
my god,
too.
this is the
Yeah.
greatest thing!" And it's like, "Yeah, it's pretty good." And then I'll like come up with some counterpoint just to sort of even out the scales.
Yeah, it's almost an obsession with being humble. Like, I don't want to get an ego. I don't want people to think I think I'm better than I
I
am.
don't think I have that. At least that's not my mentality. It probably comes off exactly like that.
Okay.
But
Is it just
yeah,
recognize, like, I think you just recognize your limitations. Like, you know what you can do and what you just
I have a
can't do.
very strong sense of self-worth that doesn't need a whole lot of validation. I know that I obviously like putting things out in the world. I like that people are watching it.
Mm-hmm.
But that seems to be like at that point, well, a whole bunch of people watched it. That's good. Now I got to go make something else. And I don't know.
That's the perfect way to
Yeah.
go about it, though. Like, that's the attitude more people need to have. It's just like, you're not, look, and I've said this before, I don't want to be making art for a void, right? I'm not just screaming into the emptiness of space and just being like, what's the point of making this art? No, like, yeah, I want people to watch it, but it's still at the end of the day, not for them, right? I want people to see it. I want people to enjoy it and be entertained by it. But at the end of the day, it's for me, right? It's not for other people. I'm doing this for myself.
You have this great thing in your head, and you have to make it real in some fashion. You got to make it some percentage real, like those like third edition illusion spells. You got to get a phantasm that's at least 40% real, so it's there and it has some effect on the world, even though it it's not 100%.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, it's just.
But it's something. The thing why when we're doing it with D&D is that it's also more than, because I have all kinds of great stuff in my head and scripted things I want to make, but there's something that makes it extra cool that you do it with your friends. Like the events that happen, you didn't totally control those. You were back and forth, and if people added in things that you never would have thought of, and that both forces you to sort of push your boundaries, but it also just makes it their thing as well. And so that makes it much more like it's very easy to get stuck and sick of, even though I'll make a project, I'll try and write story that is just me, like I'm just writing a story and it's great and I'll love it, but I'll get farther ahead of it in my head. And the problem is the longer you spend on a project, you get a version of it in your head that is much more complete than where the actual project is. And it creates this schism where you feel like you're doing work that's already been done and you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get stuck with that. And I think part of the fact making TDDC, because involves all this contribution from my friends, this massive contribution, that they're at least half the story. And since they outnumber me, probably more than half of it is them, even if I'm laying out all the groundwork. That makes it interesting, even going back to it, especially once I started recording the sessions. So I have all these crappy raw recordings, usually not any quality that I could put online, but it's really great because I can go back and find all these things that I didn't remember and all these great lines that they had and funny reactions and stuff like that. And that keeps it fresh for me. So it also makes it feel like I have a little like this obligation to convey their awesomeness. And sometimes they're not as awesomeness, because that's hilarious too. They all have great moments of awesome and occasional moments of whoops.
Yeah.
And that stuff just makes it great.
One of the things I realized with writing scripts for the Peace Guild is that we played in when I was in China in the Peace Corps. Like that's that origin story. It's like this was a group where we were in different parts of a foreign country where nothing around us is familiar, and the only thing that we had to look forward to that was sort of reminded us of home and just that familiarity was going off into a gothic horror world that we're trapped in and trying to escape from. It's kind of, there's a bit of a a bit of a parallel there in a way, because like we're kind of stuck here for 2 years. Let's be stuck in Barovia for 2 years too. Why not?
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and we played on Discord for the majority of it. We did like all of our rolling and our spell lookups and stuff like that. And so I now have this record. I can go back into our Discord chat, into those logs, into like 2017 and look at what we were typing. And I have pulled lines from that. I've written notes, and then I like, if something was like intriguing, I want to know more about it, I put it off to the side, and then I talk to the player. I'm like, do you remember this? What was the context for this? I want to know. And like, having the players available to like ask those questions, having the Discord log, and then at some point I did start actually taking notes and like writing down what the turns were for like important combats and stuff. So helpful. Having recordings, I can only imagine, is like peak helpfulness.
Yeah, well, there'll be advantage to that too, though, because there's sometimes we get what I hate is that I don't have the maps most of the time. There are a lot of the maps where I might have like a map that's on paper, or I might have drawn something out on the grid there, but there's a lot of reconstruction that goes into, even though if I have the full recording without having taken pictures at the table, there's a lot of reconstruction that goes on, like how the hell they were positioned that created this attack of opportunity and little stupid things like that. So
yeah, with homebrew too, because like you're making, I mean, all right, that's something we haven't really touched too much on either, is that you like built all this. Like you said, oh yeah, I'm the guy building Legos, but like no, really though, everything's homebrew from like ground up. And like I've had a few other people on the podcast before who just do all homebrew, and like I'm always amazed, because it's like the scope of something like that is just outrageous. With Curse of Strahd, I'm lucky. I could just buy the book, which I did, and I'm like, oh, here's the maps.
Yep.
So it's like I don't need to do any of that, but like that's easy route, you know, like having to reconstruct everything. I can't imagine like the logistics that go into that.
Yeah, at least I like building the world initially. I did a couple of things. I said, I want there to be a reference point, because when we started this, and I didn't know I was going to make videos later on or anything, but just for the players' benefit, like if I'm going to make this world, I've noticed like a lot of homebrews, it's very easy to walk into a homebrew thing and have no idea what's going on, and your players, like your characters, kind of don't know what's going on, even though they should. So I thought one of the things I'd do is, I'm going to just say 1,000 years ago, we did a Lord of the Rings. You know, in Rick and Morty, they're like swearing, oh man, we got to do a fucking piece of shit Star Wars. It was like 1,000 years ago in my world, they did a fucking piece of shit Lord of the Rings. That's what happened. And I said that, but I have that point. That's 1,000 years ago. So things can have changed a lot, but that gives everyone this sort of frame of reference. The dwarves lived in their mountains, and and 2 of the 3 dwarf holds got wiped out. The orcs like tried to take over, and then they got beaten back, and then their land got cursed and turned into a desert, so there are hardly any orcs left. But everything, it's so much easier for people to immediately jump in when there's this common reference point. It's like Lord of the Rings, but this. Like Lord of the Rings, but that.
Yeah.
And even though I wasn't doing that explicitly so much, just mentioning it like once, and then all these other things, it gets it very easy for them to figure out what sort of world they're in, what sort of expectations, and it's a common history too. So now they just felt more grounded the whole time. I'm not saying everyone should do that with Lord of the Rings, because we all know we all have too much Lord of the Rings in our worlds.
Yeah.
But there's an idea of that. I think that there's some way that it'd really be beneficial, whatever kind of game you want to do. It'd be just cool if you said, like, 50 years ago, they did a Big Trouble in Little China, and then we're 50 years later, and that's the kind of world that I'm building. Or, 50 years ago, they did a Star Wars or whatever, like really.
A reference point, essentially.
Yeah, 500 years ago, it was like the first book of Dune, and then we ignored all the other books of Dune because that's not what I'm doing. But you just having some little thing like that, it doesn't have to have that much impact on your game, but it's like a cheating way of giving people this reference that gives them immediately, they have an idea in their heads of the feel, and their idea might be a little different than yours. That's okay too, because they've got a part in making the game too. But I found that was a really useful cheat for me. And then from there, I'm building up all like figure out the cosmology myself and figure out sort of a timeline of things. I think a lot of people do say that they like my lore and that it feels like there's so much more going on in the world. And part of that is just like I built up a time. I figure out what happened, and I figure out the relationships between nations and stuff like that. So I like to have that idea of what other things might be going on in the world. But another big part of it is just having some stories within the world. So they did their Lord of the Rings 1,000 years ago, and there are a couple of legends that we bring into the story really early, where you hear about that, and it maybe gives you an idea, A, of the past, B, that there's a lot more in the world than you, but C, it might also have some little inkling in it that might tie into something that you're going to deal with in the campaign as it goes forward.
Have you written or published anything about your setting?
I haven't. No, I mean, I do all the extras videos. Every episode of TDDC, I do an extras video, and I talk a lot about the lore in there. And nowadays, I answer a lot of questions from patrons in there. I mean, I answer questions all over my Discord from basically anyone, because my Discord isn't patrons only. I just like, people can come into anyone who likes TDDC. They see a link at the bottom of the video. They go in there and they're like, hey, what's up with this? And I'll tell them, or I won't tell them because it has to do with future stuff.
Right.
Like, sorry, no spoilers. But they can discuss things. There's a fan theories room, so they can go crazy trying to guess what's going to happen down the road. But yeah, it's actually really helpful having other people ask me questions about the world. Because when somebody asks you a question about the world, they're kind of like three options. One, you know the answer and you can just tell them. Two, you don't know the answer, or the answer is something that you can't tell them. So you said, sorry, I can't answer that. And three, the answer is something, the question is just something you didn't really think of.
So then
every time somebody asks you a question about your world that you haven't thought of, or you have like a vague idea, but when they ask the question, now you're thinking of how to answer this, it forces you to think more about some events that happened in the past, or just why is this thing that way? And every time you answer one of those questions to yourself, you are building the world in your mind, at least. But yeah, I don't have anything resembling a published campaign setting, because that would take away a whole bunch of time from the episodes, which already take too long. So
I'm sure your fans are just thankful to have the episodes so that they can just consume that.
For the most part, yeah, they would like more of them. But on the other hand, they haven't been coming out any faster since I quit my job, but they have been getting longer. So the actual amount of TDDC, like the number of minutes of TDDC that came out in the last year, I think has gone up, even though the number of episodes has not, and it's possibly gone down.
Yeah, I've noticed this past year that ever since COVID started, some things had changed. And it's not just because of COVID, but just coincidentally, I got more involved in the community as a whole. So like before that, I was sort of just on my own, isolated, doing my own thing, and like aware of other people. Like even in 2019, I did in Inktober. I think I drew you too, along with a bunch of other creators. Like there's people I was aware of, but like I didn't really talk to many people.
Yeah.
And then I started the podcast. That was at the beginning of 2020. COVID happened right after that. So it's like around the same time as when I started to actually meet people and get involved in the community. And I noticed that even though I was like on lockdown and I wasn't actively working for a lot of COVID, I wasn't making anything quite faster because I was also doing a lot of other stuff with other people. I had like spread out and like I had more time for all sorts of different things, which I'm thankful for because it kept me sane. You know, because I like it's one thing when you choose to be a shut-in and like make your art and stuff and the world goes on around you. And it's another thing when everybody has to be shut-in and you're not really allowed to go to the places that you would otherwise go to relax. So it's like this kind of helped me through it. But like my main thing was I didn't get faster like I thought I would either, because I was like, well,
I so thought I would get faster, and
I think what it is like I got bigger in the sense of like my scope for what I wanted to do grew. And that's another reason why I'm doing the Blender thing is like I need a program, one, that's free. That's just a given. And then like two, having the 3D aspect and a camera that moves in 3D space it opens up so many doors and doesn't really close that many. Like some of the stuff that I miss from Adobe, I'm already kind of learning how to do without. And if I can learn how to make 3D objects, I can make settings in 3D. A time sink for sure, but then an asset that you can just reuse again and again and again going forward, which is like really attractive. There's only like 3 or 4 actual like I would say like cities or whatever in Barovia. So it's like I only need to do like 4 complicated settings and then the castle, and everything else can just be drawn. It's fine, you know.
No, that's pretty cool. I think I don't think that's going to work for me, because especially when we go to TDDC2, I'm going to have all these entirely like very different places. They're gonna do some stuff on boats. They're gonna go way different place. They start out in Bankton, which we've seen before, but I got to do it slightly better because it's been 30 episodes since then. But then they're gonna go off into a different part of the world. So I'm gonna need all these new assets and like different dungeons. And things like that. Anyway.
Interiors and dungeons and stuff. I mean, I'm still gonna draw everything, but like being able to frame it in a 3D space, like for example, I could just place like a cube or like a wall and just wall stuff off and create like a room or like a space that I can just generally understand where the barriers are gonna be. Then I can move my camera around. And I could be like, okay, well, this is the camera angle I want. I can like take a little snapshot, put it in a different program, and then just draw the background along those vertices or whatever.
Yeah, no, I can see where that's appealing. I'm not defending Adobe at all. They're like a terrible evil corporation.
no accusations here.
I am locked into their ecosystem, which is what their ecosystem is designed to do. Is designed to lock you in. So I don't really want to spend the time both learning and also converting or redoing all my assets for a new
it's a
thing.
sink, because like otherwise I could have immediately started working on an episode right after January. I don't know how far I'd be, but taking the time to learn Blender, I feel like I'm in a stronger position, even though it will take more time, and hopefully maybe this time it will be faster. I don't know, we'll see.
That is always the hope. Don't pin your hopes too hard on it. Like keep chasing that dream. Keep chasing that dream of it'll be faster. Just don't let yourself get so attached that you get disappointed if and when it's maybe not as faster as you were hoping.
Yeah, but I think what I'm learning is another reason is like I know a lot of people are learning Blender. I know a lot of people I know already know it. I might want to start getting other people on the project for the art stuff so that I don't do everything, because I know that does make it go faster. Delegating out tasks.
If you could get to the point, if you know the people, and if you can not be spending more time in administration and negotiation and stuff like that, you can have a team that's actually working together well. I worry about that because I am such a like super loner, and I'd have to find people and then deal with people. And again, so when like I ran my big Patreon campaign, because I had a little Patreon, and it was like, okay, here's the amount of money I need to be able to live on, where I could just quit my job and do this. And I said, we're going to call it Operation Awesome Unemployment. We got there. And yeah, I really need to make a new Patreon like ask video on a page, because it's super old, and I want to reflect better that the episodes are not more frequent, but they are longer. but I feel this pressure, and it's not coming from them for the most part, but I feel a lot of pressure that I've got to keep producing because I've got all these people who are supporting me.
That's something I mean, I only got like 5 patrons, but even to those 5, I feel that pressure too. And then I remember, like, when I do make posts, none of them look at my posts. They just want to support me. I'm like, I just need to do my thing and not worry so much about it.
I did make sure when I was deciding how am I going to do a Patreon and what am I going to offer, because I knew that I didn't want to create a lot of gated content. Yeah. I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time creating things that very few people would see. So there's a fairly limited amount of that kind of stuff. And I needed to make sure that whatever I was doing, it wasn't going to take a horrendous amount of my time. But I wanted it to also, I had to make it clear that they're supporting me to support me so that I can keep making stuff, and it's not as transactional as some things are. It's not like you do this and then I'll give you this, or I'll send you stickers or whatever. that I would have to spend time making and all that stuff. But it's hard because I don't like I don't like asking for money either. But now I don't know. I'm very fortunate in how well it's gone. I have a small, very strong community that's tremendously supportive of me, and so far it's working out. Yeah, the other thing I was saying though is that when I did that, I finally quit my job in like August of 2019. So I went and like secluded myself, and then I am such a gigantic loner that when the pandemic came, like, and everyone locked down, well, I locked down super hard. I followed all the lockdown stuff more than what they were like. I went out for the absolute minimum possible things. I'd like walk to the grocery store like once a month or whatever. And then I'm just like, it didn't change my life that much because that's how big an introvert I was. But on the other hand, like you, I've been actually getting more social, and I did this for years and never had any communication with the community at all. And then sometime around that time, like somebody else made me a Discord. So I didn't have a Discord. It's like, I don't know what to do. It's like this other guy. I don't remember his username is Crab something. I think he's still got an admin role. He hasn't showed up very much lately.
Not Crit Crab,
he went and
right?
just like made a Crit Crab. No, I don't think
Crab,
so.
okay, I was going to say Crit Crab reads Reddit stories. He's a cool guy, but I wouldn't expect him to make a Discord server.
I don't think it's him. I think it's just a coincidence there. But this person makes me a Discord and then gives control of it to me. So he's no longer in control of it. He's just like, you have a Discord now.
What a bastard.
And
what an
now
evil move.
Now I'm on there like all day long, like all the time, and answering questions from people, and people are posting memes and junk like that, fan theories and stuff. So it's kind of crazy. And then, yeah, I've started... You and one or two other people have kind of got me sucked into the like finding out about the other people who are doing the D&D animations.
We're all coming together. We're gonna be the Justice League of D&D animators.
Yeah, something like that.
It's cool. I'm really super thankful just to be able to like speak with other creators, because like, I mean, there are still people that just have chosen to be doing their own thing, and that's completely fine. You know, like there's no requirement. Like, you don't have to. No one has to be like on friendly. Like, hey, we're now best friends because we make similar content. Like, no, people can do their own thing. It's fine. But it is nice to have that community there, because it's like, now I can bounce ideas off of like you and other people. I'm like, is this a good idea? Like, already we were talking about the podcast intro and like and just stuff about that, and I was like, the biggest reason I don't make it shorter is because I commissioned it to my cousin and I paid money for it. And also the song was even longer than that, and I shortened it. And I'm like, I just refuse on principle to make it any shorter. People that can't sit through that, then fuck it. I'm not, they're lost.
Yeah, I don't know though, because I look at a lot of things, and I often feel dumb giving advice sometimes, because I've given a bunch of, like, I did for a while, I made some like D&D advice type videos, and a lot of them are not exactly what I do, even the advice that I give, but it's like someone's got a question or an issue, and I think through, like, I try and break down a way to make that better, make that work for them. And it's something similar. Like, I had one video where I suggested, well, how do you add depth to your campaign world? You could do it with a timeline, which is, I didn't do it in quite the same mechanistic way, but it's still, I created that timeline where it's like, here's my Lord of the Rings ish war, and then here's where like the gods did whatever, and here's later on the dwarves moved to their new place, and they have all these things. And once you have the timeline, you can just go in there, and every day, if you want to, you could just go and think of something and slot it into your timeline. And if you just keep doing that, eventually you're going to have a whole history there, which is kind of what I did, but I didn't think about it that way. I didn't have like a mechanism. I was just like making shit up.
Right. Yeah.
But you try and turn that into advice for people. And I feel very weird giving advice, because I don't know if like a lot of the people in the community, especially the animators community, have run and played a lot more D&D than I have, I think.
Really?
Even though I've been doing it for like decades. I don't know.
Is it because you just have like one or two very long running campaigns, would you say?
Basically, yeah.
I see. But that's what I want, though. Like, I play a lot of D&D, but it's spread out, and it's like lots of different characters, and it's like I'm constantly putting on different hats, and I'm a little tired. Like, I can't get super sucked into a world like I used to.
I've made some characters and I've played in little campaigns that never go very long. So I wouldn't mind the opportunity. Like being a GM is pretty cool because you do get to play all the characters in the world and you can do all the voices and you know. Well, I remember back when I was just built and I had to go in there and clean out the creation forge. Well, that was a mess. But you can just so being a GM is great for that. But as a GM, and you've been a GM for a long time and you don't get that much opportunity to play and stick with characters, you kind of want to have that character that has like the big complicated backstory and go through like a Deep Space Nine character arc with them or something.
Yeah.
And then also you get these character ideas where like you get to play characters so often that you get these dungeon master like character ideas where you're coming up with ways to wedge in that you're kind of like playing more than one character. Is like, oh yeah, we've got split personalities for my changeling, or like,
yeah.
Well, there's you think this is my character, but it's actually the sword is the character. It's just controlling that body. And then if something happens to go wrong, then you might have a different person on your hands, and they might not be too happy, or maybe they made a deal with the sword, and that's why it's been in control all this time.
I think I've struggled now with like I played so much 5e that like I can't make a character that isn't some weird gimmicky thing anymore. Because, like, it's boring now to just play one class and stick with one class. Like, I get it. I understand it too well. It's not adventurous for me. It's not exciting for me to think about. And enough people play just regular, like, we're fighting goblins. Like, that's not interesting to me anymore. I know what goblins are. I know how they act and behave.
Yeah.
That's not, a surprise. Oh, you see a floating creature and she's ethereal and her jaw descends when she sees you and she screams. I'm like, it's a banshee. Well, you don't know that it's a banshee. I'm like, yeah, but I fought banshees before. Oh, you see a cow man in a labyrinth. It's a minotaur. Like, I know what they all are. I need like new shit to fight. I need new builds to play because I don't feel stimulated mechanically. And I've got a number of people who I really respect who are like, the thing that ruins D&D for me are people who focus too much on the mechanics of what their character would do and not enough on the role play. And I'm like, but I play so many different games, I don't even get a chance to get sucked in. So if all I'm doing is just playing like short little spurts of like these characters, then it's the mechanics that keep me, locked in place because it's like, during combat, I'm like, oh, okay, this works differently than this other character that I play.
Yeah, when I make characters, I want to have the character be very interesting to me, but I also want to mess around with mechanics. I'm not trying to optimize to make the best character necessarily. Yeah. I usually find something that I like that is kind of effective, or maybe it's not even that effective, and then I want to make it effective. I want to make sure my character overall is effective and useful. But I'm going to do it based around whatever thing it is that I like. That I decide I'm doing this like in 5e. I decided that Witchbolt is going to be my thing, and I'm going to go through every goddamn book and find some way to make a Witchbolt like mage that is useful, even though Witchbolt may not be the ideal thing. But but I've decided it's cool. I'm going to force lightning people with Witchbolt, and that's what I'm going to do. So I got to find ways to not get interrupted and to milk this thing for all its, or just some idea like that.
Yeah.
But I tend to do a lot of, when I'm building a character, especially in 3.5, which I know very well, and there are like a million classes and builds and stuff like that you can do. I tend to, it doesn't matter what I start with, whether it's like the character like concept or the mechanics, like which class I want to play or something. I tend to go back and forth a lot of times. So like, I'm going to be a warlock, and what's my patron going to be like, and what's my character is going to be like. And then I started looking at, so I've started with the mechanics there, but I started thinking of what they're going to be like role play wise. And then I go back and I find ways to reinforce that with the mechanics. And I find ways to take those mechanics and make them more interesting for my character, reflavor things and say,
Yeah.
I like going back and forth a whole bunch of times until I get something that's very into what they physically do in the game is very integrated with who they are.
I mean, I'm doing that right now, and I've got a game that I'm in called Antumbra. It's a stream game with some other creators like Captain Cheeky, Vitamin Dieter, Eldritch Sugar, Fel the Leb, and it's a very fun game that we stream every Monday on Kamchiki's channel, and I play a Ifrit Genasi, like a fire Genasi woman.
Yep.
And she's basically like, my idea is I want to make a like a barbarian type character that's not a barbarian at all and is actually like a wizard blade singer with a few levels of blood hunter, and like it works out really well once it starts to get off the ground, but because it's a multi-class, it takes a while. In the meantime, everybody's better at me than at everything. I never finish off at anything. I got this like boisterous character that's like a pirate and wants to like do really well in combat and never gets the finishing blow. And so like the way that I thought I was going to roleplay this character is ending up being very different than how I actually am roleplaying her, because I thought she was going to be the reckless one that charges in, you know, doesn't go down. I made her very good at not just outright going to 0 hit points. I don't think she's been knocked to 0 yet. But like, she's not like, she's a tank. I made a tank wizard, which is a weird concept. And we have an actual wizard who does fire spells that are more potent than the actual fire lady that I play. So they call the other wizard the real fire lady, and I'm just the one that looks like she's a fire lady. And then we've got an actual barbarian rogue multi-class guy who's like, he hits harder than I can hit. And does kind of, he's also a pirate, so he's like the stronger of the two pirates. And then there's another guy who's playing a paladin, and they're a paladin. So if I ever 1v1 them, they'd smack me down with a smite faster than I could do anything. Like, and they're a tabaxi too, so if I tried to run away, they just... So, like, I can't outcompete pretty much anybody in this group. And even roleplay-wise, the most reckless person is the other pirate. He's, like, super-duper reckless. So I'm sitting here with this character, like, now what do I do with this character? Like, how do I play this character that's, like, I envisioned was going to go in one direction and is now... There's all these other niches that have been filled. What niche do I fill now? It's kind of an interesting concept, and the reason I bring it up is because the way that I tried to make her different and more like unique, like away from what everybody else is doing, so I don't like step on anyone's toes, is reflavoring. Like you mentioned, I basically all my spells are fire based. So like lightning lure, the cantrip, where you can like shoot out some lightning and then like whip it out at them and pull them. It's a Baylor whip now. It's like a fire whip from the Balrog of Morgoth, right? And then instead of Misty Step, it's Smoky Step. Poof. Brimstone smoke, right? Nightcrawler type of teleport. And then what was the other one?
When 5e when 5e came out, people complained a lot that there just weren't enough options and stuff like that. But I don't know what it is about the 5e system. It just feels like it's so easy to take the abilities that you like mechanically and just reflavor them to whatever the hell you want. And it's one of those things. There are some classes that I like and some classes that I don't like. Like, I like martial arts stuff, but I don't think there's a single game edition where I've liked the monk class mechanically. I just always hate how, like, they never work well in the game, or at least they never work how I want them to work. If I could still I would play a monk in 5e, no problem. It's just that my class would not involve monk. I'd be like a barbarian.
Yeah, with like unarmed brawler,
because a barbarian
can
go unarmored, and you can be like a karateka where you've just like hardened your body. It takes it, but you could just ignore that and just flavor it that you're still dodging stuff. And mechanically, it works just fine. You'd be like a couple barbarian levels and go rogue. Rogue does tremendous amounts of damage with the sneak attack and stuff like that. You just have to be strategic. It's because
the monk requires wisdom, so it's like now you're mad because you've got to have all these physical components to make a truly good monk. And also wisdom on the side. By the way, you need that for it's like, it's just a lot. So most people don't go into strength.
I didn't like their abilities much anyway in 5e with the Kai points. So I can't ever stop looking at it. Like, look at these things you can do with Kai points. And getting the extra attack, okay, that's pretty good. But it's also not that interesting.
I've never heard it pronounced Kai. I was like, Kai points. Oh, ki. Like chi or chakra, right?
I don't know, like DBZ Kai, like that's how I pronounce it. So I don't know.
Maybe
I think that I don't know or really care which one is right.
You're like,
I
the
think
monk
that they're
sucks
both
anyway, so it doesn't
I think they're
matter.
both pronunciations that are out there, but that's not the point. The point is you can do things like you can spend it for the extra attack, and that's fine. But like a lot of the other things that they can do with their Kai points at the early levels, you look at like what's a level 2 rogue do? Level 2 rogue can do all those things the exact same all day long at no cost. You get like your bonus action sprint and your bonus like
Yeah, I mean the thing. So I have a multi-class monk for a lot of builds, and the reason I like monk is its mobility options. I understand cunning action gives you that bonus action dash whenever you want.
yeah,
But
and disengage.
But with the monk, you have the option of Step of the Wind doesn't just give you a dash; it also increases your jump distance by 2 and a factor of 2. If you also have access to the jump spell, which increases it by a factor of 3, you can increase it by a factor of 6. I've used this on the Tall Tales game I played with Runesmith, where I made an Easter Bunny build, where I jumped, I leaped with a satyr. I leaped, I think, 85 feet up into the air, maneuvered my horns, and just pile drive the Easter Bunny. I took falling damage, but that thing was just gone. So, like, you can use mechanics of the monk if you're looking for mobility, especially like fast movement at level 2. Or unarmored movement, rather, instead of having to wait until like level 5 barbarian to get it or something like that. And it keeps going up, like, you can get really fast as a monk, and that can be really useful on a battlefield.
Yeah. But it can also, in a lot of situations, not. Like, mobility is great, but there are also a lot of situations where the quarters are too tight. That extra speed doesn't really make any difference compared to just having the bonus action dash or bonus action disengage. If you can just attack and then go back around a corner, that's in a lot of situations there's no difference whether you can move an extra 60 feet after that.
I guess it just depends on, like, also, is your DM a theater of the mind person, or is your DM
well, there's no regular DM because everyone starts little games and then we play it for a few sessions and then it sort of peters out usually.
Yeah. And I mean generally for listeners too, because like if you don't have a map, then mobility isn't going to be super important, because if it's theater of the mind, a lot of times, almost all the time, my DMs are like, yeah, you're 30 feet away. Like every time they just go like, yeah, you're within movement distance. So it's like, you don't need mobility with those types of games, because generally you're always going to be close enough to get to your opponent, or you'll have some answer that you can do. And it's all in your head anyway, so it doesn't matter.
And it's kind of funny. Like I hadn't actually been playing D&D for a long time. We've been doing all board games and now virtual board games with the pandemic and stuff, because we haven't been meeting for D&D. And we could do stuff online, but I also there's this little bit of pressure you get when you've got this like video series. It's like 60 videos long, and I want to go back to that campaign, but some things have changed, and we got some personnel changes and stuff like that. And there's a lot of pressure. Like whatever I do, it's got to be awesome, and I got to get around that pressure so I can get back to actually doing it. Not that I'm going to run out of content anytime soon.
No.
With TDDC 2, that's going to go on for years at the rate I do it.
I mean, yeah, things change. Like even.
But thing is, I've got to get back into that. Part of it is I need to get over my over planning a little bit too much, because I'm really the one who wants to over plan. When I'm sitting there, and it was when I was doing a job that was a little bit more menial, like required less brain power, that was working for me, because at work there'd be a bunch of time when I was doing something that required like 30% brain, and then the rest of my brain's off there like planning the next adventure, thinking of things that can happen. But I like to plan, like, okay, I know where we are now, and the next session, well, I know what's going to happen next session because we're kind of like locked in. But after that, I don't know where they're going to go. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, based on how they act, I think they're going to do one of these two things. So I've got to mostly plan those two things. And then, but they also might do things 3 or maybe 4. And there's like this list of decreasing probabilities. And I got to try and figure out, for if they do one of those things, I don't want to be left with my pants down. Now, I'm not going to sit around and plan 5 adventures, because I'm not insane, not quite that insane. But I need to figure out, I need to have like at least so like a 1 line or a 1 paragraph in my mind of what kind of things I can do if they take this direction that is, I think, unlikely based on their behavior, but you don't know, because they could do anything.
Right, yeah.
And I one of the reasons that I kept having that, like, gameplay would, like, the game would slow down, or we missed weeks, or I like switched over to the second campaign, is because you get a little bit burnt out when my job became a little bit more brain power intensive. Like, I was doing semi-menial stuff, and then they found out that I had a computer programming background, and they're like, could you start making some stuff for us around the office? And then my job became way more like fulfilling and interesting. But that now when you're doing creative stuff at work all day, it became incredibly hard
It's taxing, yeah.
to plan to run a D&D campaign and then also be like making videos about the D&D campaign.
Right. Well, that's the thing about like work that a lot of people I know. This is a bit off the topic of D&D and stuff, but like I know people who just do physical labor all the time, and they to them work is physical, and so if you're sitting at a desk and that's your job, they don't have respect for whatever you're doing. Like that's not work. I lift big tree trunks of lumber all day, or I'm working in a factory or a warehouse and doing all this. And it's like, that's work too. But like, you can also kind of shut your brain off and just go through the motions with that kind of stuff. Whereas like when you're sitting at a desk, you're not like moving around that much maybe, but like you're calculating and thinking up stuff, being creative, trying to make stuff look good. You're using your judgment. Your brain's active and working until, for 8 hours, and then you got to go home and do your creative shit too with D&D. Like
when I was going to work and programming for 8 hours a day, or more likely programming for 5 hours a day, and problem solving like coworker stuff and trying to like find out what they want, and I got to like plan ahead for the next project. And some jackass would call a meeting instead of just answering my email and stuff like that. That's really draining on the exact things that you need, the exact mental resources that you need to be doing creative stuff. So,
right.
Of course, that's why I thought Operation Unemployment would make things go faster, and they went, instead of faster, they went different. But anyway, so yeah, to try and get over my over planning, just in the last month or so, I made this rule system. It's like not D&D. I made this like RPG rule system. There's like barely a system. Where the idea was just to set it up so we technically had some methods for adjudicating things, but really it's to be improv based. The person says like, I want to do this. It's like, I want to hotwire that motorcycle, or I want to like break down a door, or I'm going to try and bash this guy in the head, and have the simplest possible system for that. There literally aren't even movement rules in my system. That's how theater of the mind it is. But the idea is that I really have no idea what they're going to do because it ended up being, I just told them it was like comedy, horror, maybe sci-fi sort of thing, and make 3 characters because there's some reasonable chance of dying.
Yeah.
And then we get started, and the idea is by the end of the first session, they found like the portal gun from Rick and Morty.
Oh my God.
So now everything is on the table, right? So finding motivation for them is actually the harder part. But it means that when they do something, they say, well, okay, we're just going to pop over to a new dimension. It's like, what's going to be in this new dimension? And then they like, okay, I'm going to try and do this. And I have to find, so it's trying to break me out of the over planning a little bit.
Yeah.
Which then you realize that I have like a spreadsheet here, and I've got a whole bunch. I've got some like point form like ideas for that. This is maybe a plot I could throw. If they maybe they'll find a dimension. If they go to another dimension, because they could at any time. Like there's basically no control even as a GM. I have very little control at all over what's going to happen. They could at basically any time choose like, yeah, we don't like what's going on here, and just portal to a place they've been before or a new place, just to get out of there. So
yeah, I mean that you might be faced with that.
We've run 2 sessions of that so far, and that's it's we're having fun so far. I don't know how long I can keep it going before we run out of momentum, because some of when they have all the power in the universe, in a sense, it becomes a whole different thing. Like what?
Yeah, I mean, Rick and Morty are always they've got all the power in the universe, and yet they still find challenges and stuff. I think that's a good lesson to take. Is like you could probably still make interesting.
The tough part is motivating them, though. Like what actually motivates them, and a lot of what Rick and Morty go through is that they're not super motivated to do the things that,
or like one of them's motivated and the other one's like over it. Yeah.
Why are we going to this stupid place?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I've seen a lot of people trying to do more like improv-based stuff now to kind of move away from just thinking about the rules and things like that.
Right. I try and my barely a rules system, I wrote in, like I put in a little thing for luck, basically. The idea is when I describe a scene, I'm never going to completely describe a scene because you can't. It's all 100, like 1,000,000% theater of the mind. Like more like D&D theater of the mind goes so far, but usually you have a little bit more idea what's going on. If we're in modern times or future stuff, it gets really hard to describe like what is in an environment. So the idea is if I don't describe something in the environment, you can just ask for it. It's like, is there a fire extinguisher in a hallway? And as a GM, like I can say yes or no. If it's like, yes, if you're in a hospital hallway, of course, there's going to be a fire extinguisher. Or no, you're in like a truck. There's not a fire extinguisher like in the back of a truck or whatever. But if it's in doubt at all, I say, here's roll a D. I'm going to say, I'm not sure if there's I'm going to say roll a 4+, like roll a D6. And if you get a 4 or higher, then you will find something similar to what you were looking for that you can use. Or maybe it's harder. Maybe it's cooler. I give them, they could have luck points to manipulate the rule. Like if they really want to find, they really need to find a drill on this construction site. And I said it was only like a 4 or plus. 2 of them could spend 1 luck point, and now there's a 2 or higher. If they fail, they don't spend their luck points. But if they succeed, regardless of what they roll, I take away those 2 luck points. But they find the thing that they needed somehow. But
yeah, I like this. I like a luck system, or just adding like a luck stat in 5e or even Pathfinder 3.5. Like having another ability score just opens up a lot of doors, I think.
Yeah, well, that's not what you're going to find in Barely a System, because Barely a System only has 3 ability scores. Let's not derail the whole podcast.
No, that's not derailing. That's a tabletop RPG. It's on topic. Also, we can talk about whatever. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
Although we are reaching an hour, so I think we'll probably end it pretty soon. I guess I want to end it with one more question then. So you're kind of a forever DM. Would you say that that's correct?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't always been, but like in our group, if I'm doing something, it's the most likely to be one that is going to be stable and keep going for a long period of time. Because I may get stuck a little bit, I may get burned out sometimes, but I always have more ideas of what we should be doing. It's just like sometimes the getting from here to there gets blocked. But
okay,
I'm most likely to be the GM.
So let me ask then, what was not maybe but a favorite moment as a DM that you remember and would like to maybe share with me in the audience? And it could be like a personal like thing, like, yes, my story beats went just as planned, or maybe a player subverted your expectations in a way you didn't expect, and it made for a really awesome moment.
That's really hard to think of. Get all this stuff in my head of like the whole like
think
CDDC
back throughout your entire life
stuff.
And give me one moment to share on the podcast right now.
These kind of questions are not my forte.
Good. Putting you on the spot.
And I can come up with crazy moments from when I was a player. See, I have.
All right, yeah, that works too.
I have a bunch of stories from back when I was in Ottawa, where I went to university, and then after university, I had some friends I hung out with there, and a few people on my channel would know I had these D&D excerpts that I used to write out in text form, and that was the start of TDDC too. It was like the 3rd season of those excerpts was like the first few episodes of TDDC, and then I just turned it into videos and went from there. But there was this guy, he was a friend of mine, we were roommates, and he was like the GM in Ottawa, and I have to get those back on my website. The old website exploded, and I have to reformat those things because of my crappy year 2002 or whatever navigation I had going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not compatible with computers anymore. But I got to get those back up because we had these crazy stories. Okay, have you ever had D&D that was kind of bordering on bad D&D? Like I remember you were talking when you were talking with Whistle about like being in bad D&D. But have you ever had like bad D? It's kind of like bad D&D, but it's so bad it's good. It was bizarre. Like this campaign, you wouldn't believe this. We had this guy was one of my best friends at the time, and he's my roommate. And somehow we had this incredibly toxic relationship between the players and the GM just at the table. But it was amazing somehow. even though it shouldn't be.
Probably the adversarial relationship made it exciting, I would think.
That's and if people read another gaming comic, you're going to see that sort of relationship that is different with the fictional characters in AGC, but their relationship is somewhat inspired by the relationship we had with this GM, because we would come in every session and he would get everyone to go around the table and introduce themselves and talk about their character, and we go through these rituals every time, which annoyed the hell out of some of the players. Yeah, it's like we had the guy who played Balkoth the dwarf, and you'd get around to him and it's like, Balkoth, please describe your character, and he'd be like, a dwarf. what kind of a dwarf? She's like, bushy beard, stocky. It's like, what does your character do? Kill things. Like, and despite that being the tone, we would go through this just about every time. And you would ask that person to like recap the last session. The person who definitely doesn't want to. He just wants to start like making decisions and breaking things.
Right.
And this GM would also be like, he was always like making homebrew like rules changes and stuff like that. He was trying to think things that were like unbalanced in the system in his perception and change them. Yeah. And we would have a lot of disagreements about, like, he thought full plate was too good because everyone would wear like full plate or like chain shirt, and like those were the only two armors that were of any value, which is basically just how 3.5 edition is designed. Yeah. But he was like, so what if we change full plate to the version from 5 rings where it's +7 AC but up to +2 dex bonus? You still have the same total armor class. It's just that it actually requires you to have more than 12 dex. And I was like, we were strongly against this for some reason. And as this relationship it just got more and more antagonistic, but we were still all friends, and we would still get together and play D&D and go through his campaign and do all these things. But we had some adventures. We did this one module once, the Iron, it's not the, is it the Iron Throne? Or the Iron Fortress. We did the Iron Fortress, which is old 3.5 edition module, and Lord of the Iron Fortress. So we're going through all this crazy stuff. Because it's a module, we're like playing level like 15 characters or whatever. So we all build the craziest characters we can, and then we go up and you fight crazy stuff because it's a module. But we went through this whole module fighting all these crazy demons, and I'm trying to abuse our abilities as much as we could, because you kind of had to, because the difficulty level is really high. So the fact that I was playing like an elemental savant, where I traded 1 level of spell casting to have most of the properties of an air elemental, including 100-foot perfect flight, immunity to crits, immunity to electricity, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And you're like, have a list of like the spellcasters. We all had like everyone who was a spellcaster would have like this giant list of daily buffs. People who play 5th edition don't understand this, because you're like, well, I'd like to have these 3 spells going, but 2 of them are concentration, so I can't. It's like, no. We would have like a list. I'm going to cast these 2 spells, which last like 24 hours. Like they have a 1-day duration, but I'm going to cast them. I'm going to use extend spell meta magic to cast them 1 level higher to double their duration, because that makes 2 days, which means I can cast 1 every second day and alternate, so I can have more copies of buffs going. So this is the level of ridiculous, like, min-maxing
very
and
broken
buffing
sounding.
we're doing. All this kind of stuff. But we go through this whole place, and we're fighting through. We get to the end of the campaign, the titular Lord of the Iron Fortress, and there's a big, like, terrible pit that he's got to cross us to, and he casts like 1,000 buffs on himself somehow. Like you get into the room, there are some big nasty demons, and there's this guy who buffs like. We examine him, we determine he has a whole bunch of buffs running, and I had a spell that I had been memorizing and just had carefully kind of not used for the entire campaign. It's just a spell from the book. It was like Mordenkainen's Dispelling Screen. And the reason I had not used it the entire campaign, and admittedly, this is not the kind of thing you should ever do in a properly running D&D game, but you have to understand that we had this relationship with the GM where we were trying to thwart each other in different ways all the time. So I had been keeping a spell memorized the whole campaign, never using it, because it's so brutally overpowered in a sense. It's just a wall. You cast this wall spell. It makes a big wall. creatures can pass through the wall freely. It doesn't block them in any way. You can see through the wall. Any creature that passes through it is called Mordenkainen's dispelling screen. So any creature that passes through it
all
is
their
going to
buffs and auras get dispelled.
It's going to make a dispel check against every one of their buffs. But here's the thing that made it ridiculous. It 100%, like, creatures passing through, they get dispelled. Okay, that's okay. But I could just cast a dispel on the creature. The thing that does is it is a 4th level spell that creates a wall that 100% blocks spells. You can't cast spells through this wall. Creatures can just walk through it. The Balors on the other side of the pit, they could just fly through it. But they couldn't they couldn't like meteor swarm us or whatever crap Balors do from over there. They'd have to fly over the pit and come over to our side to do it. They couldn't range us. That meant the Lord also couldn't do any range stuff. So he had to come through, and of course he had to come through and get dispelled in the process. So his level 4 spell 100% stops them in an enclosed space from doing any range stuff to us until they pass through it.
That's busted.
And the guy couldn't pass through it without being dispelled. And
my God.
We tended to operate, and this is kind of why another gaming comic works this way, is that the GM tends to like allow things once because it's like a printed thing in the rules, and it would be kind of like unfair to the player in some bizarre like sense of honor. You can't say
you get it once and then it's nerfed or it's cut out.
I let you pick spells from this book. You took a spell from this book, and I can't just say like your spell doesn't work the first time you use it.
Yeah.
It would probably be nerfed for the second time. But I had saved it through the entire module, so the last
Knowing
fight of
you
the
would need it
module,
for the end,
the Balors have
yeah.
to come through and take us on our own turn, and the Lord of the Iron Fortress flies through, and I don't even remember if he lost his like flight buff going through and fell in the pit. I don't think so, but he lost so many spells but he came through and he was basically like a nothing, like
where just like melted him after that.
Whatever ridiculous fighter our like dwarf guy was playing that game, he like just smashed him, and we took out the enemies because they had to come closer and stuff. Like, it just thwarted the entire final room.
Can't you dispel the wall itself? Like,
no, you can't dispel it had to be taken out by ridiculous things like I don't remember if you could disintegrate it. I know you could definitely take it out with a disjunction because that's like a 9th level spell, but it was
how is that 4th level? That's too powerful for 4th level.
In that old school sort of way, it's got all these things. Well, somebody who wrote the book that contained that spell thought that it wasn't that bad because you could just walk through it. You could shoot arrows through it. And you could, but you couldn't cast a spell through it. You couldn't fireball through it.
It's an anti-magic field, but 3 levels lower than where it should be. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, just a wall of anti-magic field. I mean, you gotta have to be in an enclosed space, so they can't just go around it or over it. But
I guess there are some limitations. That's good. I really like that. I like that sort of like
that's where you get a lot of the stuff in another gaming comic, though. It's the spirit of that somehow that campaign where we sit around this table and we're just like against each other in a way that you really shouldn't be playing D&D. Like, just public service announcement. You should all be trying not to have a D&D game where the GM feels like it's only like a thin sense of honor that is preventing him from killing you, and really he's trying to find ways to kill you that are fair. And you're all trying to like thwart the GM's will. That's not the proper way to do it. But for some reason, that one table, that one group of guys, it was awesome.
Suddenly, it makes sense that you played Magic the Gathering, because that is a Magic the Gathering attitude where it's like, we're friends, but I'm not here in this game to be your friend. I'm here to kill you and win the game.
Oh yeah. No, there was a lot of that going around.
Right. Well, thank you, Demonac, for sharing. Thank you for coming on the podcast. This has been a really fun chat that I got to have with you.
Hopefully I kept it fairly interesting and passed the Turing test, etc.
Well, my panel says that, they need a little more time with this to, no, it's great. It's been a great time, and I'm really glad that you got to come on. Could you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find all my stuff at demonac.com, but mostly it's youtube.com/demonac. That's where you find Tales from my D&D campaign. My website, I've finally gotten the whole run of another gaming comic back up on my website on demonac.com, up to the dreaded issue 631, where it just kind of stopped because I got burnt out. But man, it's a hell of a ride if you can survive the ugliness of it and just like enjoy the crazy adversarial like players and GM trying to defeat each other through all these different like campaigns and adventures and stuff like that.
Hell yeah.
And I'm on Twitter at TailsDDC because some stupid spam account took the account name I would have wanted.
Right. Some other guy named Shane took Cool Voice Shane from me, so now I can't have it.
No, they did. Like, don't go to at Demonac on Twitter. It's just an account. It has like exactly one tweet that is just like a spam reply to something.
Right. Yeah.
But
same situation.
They used to have a policy where you could say like, well, I own this. That's the main reason I bought Demonac.com, because they used to have a policy where if you could show that someone was like impersonating you, they'd kind of like take, like, they were just squatting your name or something, you could take it. But apparently they changed that policy just in time that they don't care what I say. Like,
you gotta have money now.
I have
you gotta buy it or pay.
Here's my like years of YouTube, and it's like there's no response. There's just whatever.
Yeah, they got too big for the britches. But thank you for coming on, and I hope to have you on again sometime. I don't know about this year, but maybe next year we'll check in again or something.
Yeah. If I ever do anything again, we'll try and get back on there.
Yeah.
Right, thanks, Shane.